Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome to this peaceful corner of history. Before we begin our trip back to the harsh winters of medieval times, I wanted to offer a warm greeting to you, dear listener. Whether you're tucked under the covers, ready to drift off to sleep, or simply looking to relax with some quiet historical storytelling, I'm so glad you've chosen to join me tonight. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. It's always such a joy to see the diverse community of history lovers gathered here, and if you enjoy this style of calm, immersive stories from the past, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. But for now, let's allow the stresses of the modern world to fade away as we travel back to a time long ago when winter's icy grip held far more danger than most of us could imagine. A time when the changing of the seasons brought not just inconvenience, but real fear for survival. Picture yourself in the countryside of medieval Europe. The last leaves have long since fallen from the trees, and the sun hangs low on the horizon, its weak rays doing little to warm the biting chill in the air. Frosty fields crunch underfoot as a breeze carries the first few flurries of snow. Winter is coming, and for the people of this age, that means one thing above all: hardship. The cold seeps in slowly at first, but it will linger for long months to come. The landscape will soon be blanketed in white, the rivers and ponds freezing over into gleaming sheets of ice. In a time before central heating and well-insulated homes, the promise of warmth is a distant dream for all but the wealthiest. But of course, it wasn't always like this. Medieval winters were not always so harsh, so unforgiving. There was a time when the seasons passed in a more steady rhythm, when the arrival of snow was met with acceptance rather than dread, but then something changed. The climate itself began to shift, ushering in a period that would come to be known as the Little Ice Age, lasting from the 14th century all the way into the 19th. The Little Ice Age brought colder temperatures and harsher winters than anyone could remember. The reasons for this change are still not fully understood, but its impact was felt across the land. Crops failed, livestock perished, and the icy winds blew ever harder. One of the most famous examples of the Little Ice Age's fury was the Great Frost of 1709. That winter, temperatures plummeted so low that rivers and lakes froze solid. In London, the River Thames became a frozen highway, with people setting up shop and even lighting fires right on the ice. It was a surreal sight, but one that came at a cost. Many perished from the cold that year, huddled in their homes as the world outside turned to ice. But amidst all the suffering, there were some who found a strange sort of solace in the frigid. Whether one such figure was a young Isaac Newton, then a student at the University of Cambridge. When the Great Frost hit, Newton was forced to return home to his family's farm. There, huddled by the fire, he found himself with ample time to ponder the mysteries of the universe. It was during this unexpected break that Newton began to develop some of his most groundbreaking ideas, laying the foundations for his theories on calculus and optics. Who knows what other great minds might have been sparked to brilliance by the quiet isolation of a long, cold winter. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has a way of seeking out the light. But for the vast majority of people in medieval times, winter was a season to be endured rather than enjoyed. The rich could afford thick woolen clothing, ample firewood, and well-stocked larders to see them through the lean months. But for the peasants and serfs who made up the bulk of the population, it was a very different story. Imagine waking up each morning in a one-room cottage, the air thick with smoke from the sputtering fire, your breath mists in front of you as you rise from your straw mattress, careful not to disturb the shivering forms of your family members huddled around you for warmth. The cold seeps in through every crack and crevice, numbing your fingers and toes until they ache. Breakfast, if you're lucky, might be a meager bowl of porridge or some stale bread. The food from the previous harvest is beginning to run low, and you know that the long winter months will only bring more scarcity. The livestock, too, are suffering. Their coats matted with frost as they huddle together in the barn, their breath steaming in the icy air. As the day wears on, you trudge out into the snow to gather what firewood you can. It's backbreaking work, and your hands quickly become raw and chapped from the cold. But you know that without a fire, your family will not survive the night. You think of your children, their small faces pinched with hunger and cold, and you press on. This was the reality for so many in medieval times. A constant battle against the elements, a fight for survival that consumed every waking hour, and yet, even in the face of such hardship, there were moments of resilience and even joy to be found. You see, the medieval world was one deeply attuned to the rhythms of nature. The passing of the seasons was marked not just by changes in the weather, but by a rich tapestry of rituals and celebrations, and so, even in the depths of winter, there were glimmers of light to be found. One such beacon was the midwinter feast of St. Stephen, held each year on December 26th. For a brief moment, the rigid social hierarchies of medieval society were turned on their head, with a peasant or serf being crowned the lord of misrule for the day. This lucky individual would preside over a raucous celebration filled with food, drink, and revelry, a rare moment of indulgence in an otherwise austere existence. But perhaps the most enduring symbol of hope in the medieval winter was the simple act of coming together. In a world where survival often depended on the strength of one's community, the bonds of family and friendship took on a profound importance. Imagine, if you will, a small village huddled against the snow. The smoke from the chimneys mingles with the leaden sky, a sign of life amidst the barren landscape. Inside the homes, families crowd together around the hearth, telling stories and sharing what meager scraps of food they have. There is a sense of unity here, a shared sense of purpose in the face of hardship. Neighbors trudge through the snow to check on each other, bringing extra firewood or a pot of stew to those in need. In the flickering firelight, faces are lined with weariness, but also with a quiet determination. They have survived winters past, and they will survive this one too. And so the long, cold months march on, the snow piling higher, and the ice growing thicker with each passing day. But even in the darkest depths of winter, there is a glimmer of hope on the horizon. For the people of medieval times knew that no matter how brutal the season, spring would come again. They watched for the first signs with a keen and practiced eye, the slight lengthening of the days, the softening of the earth beneath the snow. And when at last the thaw began, it was celebrated with a joy and reverence that we can scarcely imagine today. Plough Monday marked the official end of the winter season, a day when work in the fields could begin anew. The ploughs that had lain idle for so long were brought out and blessed in elaborate ceremonies, a symbol of the renewed cycle of life. As the first furrows were cut into the earth, there was a palpable sense of relief and gratitude in the air. Life had been hard, yes, bitterly hard at times. But they had endured. Through the long dark of winter, through the hunger and the cold and the gnawing uncertainty, the people of medieval Europe had held fast to the promise of spring. And now, as the land began to thaw, and green shoots pushed their way towards the sun, that promise was fulfilled. It's a resilience that is hard to fathom in our modern age of convenience and comfort. The idea of facing such relentless hardship year after year is almost unimaginable. And yet there is something deeply humbling in the knowledge that our ancestors did just that. They faced the brutal reality of their world with a strength and fortitude that is nothing short of remarkable. They found hope in the darkest of times and joy in the simplest of things. And in doing so, they left us a legacy of resilience that echoes down through the ages. So the next time you find yourself shivering on a cold winter's day, take a moment to remember those who came before. Remember their struggles and their triumphs, their sorrow and their joy. And above all, remember the unbreakable human spirit that carried them through even the harshest of winters. Because in the end, that is perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from the medieval world. That no matter how dark the night or how cold the wind, the promise of spring is always waiting just around the corner. And with that, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through the brutal winters of medieval Europe. I hope that these tales of hardship and resilience have brought a new perspective to your own experiences of the season. May you always find warmth and comfort in the bonds of family and community, just as our ancestors did so long ago. And may the promise of spring light your way through even the coldest of nights. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful corner of history. And remember, if you enjoyed our time together tonight, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and share these stories with a friend. There are so many more fascinating tales to explore together. But for now, I'll bid you a fond good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. As the brutal conditions of winter tightened their icy grip on medieval society, even the most privileged were not immune to the season's merciless onslaught. In drafty primitive castles ill-equipped for the harshest months, royal households faced a formidable challenge in staving off the biting cold and keeping the court adequately provisioned. The logistics of maintaining a royal residence during winter were nothing short of staggering. Massive quantities of firewood needed to be stockpiled to fuel the roaring hearths that provided the only source of heat. The kitchen staff toiled ceaselessly to preserve meats, grains, and vegetables that would sustain the court through the long, lean months when fresh fare was scarce. Servitors scrambled to seal every crack and gap to keep out the insidious chill. But even the most diligent preparations often proved insufficient against winter's relentless assault. In one particularly chilling tale, a medieval queen is said to have tragically perished from exposure within her own palace walls. According to chroniclers record that Queen Elizabeth of Hungary was found frozen in her bed on a bitter January morning in 1326, a victim of the very castle meant to be her shelter. As grim ends like these reveal, the shadow of death cast its ominous hand over the medieval world in winter's darkest depths. Yet even amidst such despair, the resilient human spirit endured and found reasons to spark hope. For many of the populace, that faint glimmer appeared in the Feast of St. Stephen, a cherished midwinter celebration falling on December 26th. This day offered a brief respite from the unending drudgery and deprivation of peasant life, a rare, permitted chance for revelry and indulgence. At its heart was the custom of misrule, a ceremonial reversal of the usual social order. For this single day, a commoner would be named the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary power to preside over the merriment and issue playful decrees to his superiors. However fleeting, this act of sanctioned freedom gave a vital release for the frustrations and resentments bred by the harsh feudal hierarchy. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred for one joy-filled day, when all could partake as equals, in feasting, games, and carousing. The sense of fellowship fostered by such celebrations was more than simple diversion. It was a necessary survival mechanism, with winter's cruelty threatening to break both body and soul. The bonds of community and goodwill formed during the Feast of Stephen and similar revelries helped sustain the people through the leanest times. One chronicle from 1377 recounts the touching story of two peasant families, neighbors whose meager stores had run out long before spring's arrival. On the verge of starvation, they pooled the last of their tattered supplies to share a humble meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That act of generosity and unity gave them the strength to endure the season's remaining hardships. Such gestures of compassion formed the very marrow of medieval society in winter. A helping hand to a frostbitten traveler, or an extra log given to a shivering widow, could mean the difference between life and death. This shared struggle against winter's onslaught shaped a culture of interdependence that defied the era's rigid stratification, yet even the warmest shows of fellowship and goodwill inevitably faded as winter's relentless misery dragged on. The Feast of Stephen was but a small spark of light in the frozen dark, a momentary break before the bleak grind of January, February, and March. As stores dwindled, stomachs hungered, and the cold crept past even the most carefully stoked hearths, the faint hope of spring seemed to vanish. And yet, year after grueling year, medieval society endured. Through unimaginable adversity, they clung to life, upheld by the grit, fortitude, and fellowship forged in winter's merciless crucible. As the land lay dormant and the sun retreated, they still found within themselves the strength to carry on. One can only imagine the profound relief and joy that greeted the earliest hints of winter's end. The softening of the air, the lengthening of daylight, the hopeful drip of melting icicles in the sun. After months of struggle, the first signs of nature's return must have felt miraculous. For weary tillers of the soil, no day was more welcome than Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year. Falling on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January, it marked the ground's imminent thaw and reawakening. Though winter's grip had not fully loosened, the rituals of Plough Monday offered a tangible token of hope, an assurance of spring's return. One can picture furrowed fields emerging from the snow, draft animals straining against harnesses as the first sods were overturned. With each clod lifted to meet the strengthening sun, medieval people struck another blow against winter's retreat, and proclaimed their persistence in the face of nature's harshness. We in the modern world with our central heating, electric blankets, stocked pantries, and strong infrastructure can scarcely imagine the fortitude required to withstand a medieval winter. If the season's burdens feel heavy to us even now from the comfort of our climate-controlled lives, how unimaginable must true winter suffering have been. And yet, when we complain of a delayed flight or a rain-soaked commute, perhaps we should reflect on the relentless misery faced by our ancestors in those frozen months. The reserves of resilience and courage they had to summon year after year simply to survive were staggering. Their ability to carve out moments of joy and community amid such deprivation seems almost superhuman to us. That they not only endured, but also found light in the all-encompassing darkness is proof of the indomitable spirit that lies within us all, waiting to be roused in times of hardship. So the next time we feel our modern discomforts begin to weigh on us, let us recall the icy trials of those who came before. In their memory, may we tap into our own hidden reserves of grit and endurance. And as we rest gratefully in our warm beds, let us spare a thought for those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with will, fellowship, and hope. As the new year dawned and Plough Monday festivities faded into memory, medieval life slipped back into its winter rhythm. Short frozen days and long icy nights became the marks of the season. The fortunate retreated to the meager warmth of smoky huts or drafty manors. For the poor, winter meant a constant battle against the elements just to survive. One of the greatest perils was sickness. In the crowded, unsanitary conditions of the time, disease spread easily. Even a common cold became a misery, leaving sufferers red-nosed and weary-eyed, but far deadlier illnesses stalked the population. Influenza was a dreaded enemy, striking down young and old with fever, chills, and pain. In a world without vaccines or proper treatments, flu outbreaks could wipe out entire communities. The winter of 1557 was especially severe, with a virulent strain sweeping across Europe. In Paris alone, more than 10,000 lives were lost. Pneumonia, too, was a stealthy killer, preying on the weakened. The damp cold filled lungs with fluid until the victim drowned within. Crowded homes allowed pneumonia to spread quickly, sometimes wiping out whole families and leaving behind orphans. Even royalty was not spared, as the constant flow of visitors brought new infections into castles. Henry VIII himself lost his beloved wife Jane Seymour to complications worsened by poor hygiene. Children were the most vulnerable of all. Harsh weather, poor diets, and filthy conditions made winter a dangerous season for the young. Infants born during the cold months faced especially fragile beginnings. In London in the 1500s, half of all children never survived their 5th birthday. A haunting custom called bone lace spoke to this grim reality. A black ribbon tied to the hand of a dying infant could later be used to fasten their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's toll on the innocent. With threats both inside and outside the home, winter was a time to seal one's shelter and pray for survival. For the poor, even food, warmth, and safety could not be taken for granted. Firewood was precious. With strict rules governing the collection of fallen timber, families often huddled around fires made from dried dung and straw, scraping out what little warmth they could. Livestock sometimes shared the living space, their steaming breath adding faint heat. Food dwindled to salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The bounty of autumn was long gone, and spring vegetables still far away. Foraging became essential, with families searching for nettles, garlic, and wild mushrooms to add to their pots. Meals were bland and meager, often just pottage made from beans, peas, and salted pork, enough to keep life going, but little more. Many families fared even worse. Storms, droughts, and pests could wipe out harvests, plunging regions into famine. The Great Famine of 1315 was particularly terrible, brought on by heavy rains that rotted crops across northern Europe. Accounts tell of people eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh. Parents were said to smother their starving children to spare them suffering. Corpses lay unburied in the fields, too many for proper graves. Though extreme, this famine was only one example of the constant threat of hunger in medieval winters. Winter touched every part of life, work, faith, leisure, and even crime. The endless struggle to survive in the cold colored everything. Socially, winter meant gathering inward, leaning on family and community ties. The lively celebrations of the Yule log gave way to quieter evenings. With travel dangerous and daylight short, people turned to stories, songs, sewing, weaving, and carving to pass the time. Rushlights and tallow candles lit their work. Idleness was seen as dangerous, so hands stayed busy. For the literate few, winter offered a chance to read, though books remained rare. In late 15th century England, a modest tradesman's library might hold a Bible, a book of hours, and perhaps one or two more volumes. Treasures in the long dark nights, merry stories, or tales of Robin Hood. Only the wealthy could afford the beautifully illuminated volumes so cherished by those who could read often did so aloud for the enjoyment and entertainment of the entire household. Winter was a season for sharing treasured stories of brave knights, clever tricksters, and doomed lovers. The chivalric adventures of King Arthur and his court were constant favorites. Their intricate plots and noble themes helped transport listeners far beyond the cramped confines of their winter shelter. Less wholesome entertainments also served to brighten up the monotony of winter days. Gambling with dice was a common pastime, often sparking heated arguments and empty purses. The clatter of knucklebones and the rattle of dice would echo in many a tavern and great hall as fortunes were won and lost. Drink was another familiar winter diversion. The fermented comforts of ale, mead, and wine helped to lift both body temperature and spirits. Public houses enjoyed a roaring trade, offering fellowship, amusement, and an escape from the bitter, cold. Inebriation often led to looser tongues and lower inhibitions, igniting lively arguments, bodie songs, and sometimes a brawl or two. Hope for spring? There is perhaps no truer tribute to their stubborn strength. So, the next time you find yourself complaining about a delayed train or a muddy sidewalk, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. Without thermal socks, central heating, or weather forecasts, they faced each winter as a fight to be endured with every resource at hand, and they emerged victorious spring after spring. We are the heirs and recipients of their persistence and unbreakable resolve. And with that, I will leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket, secure in the knowledge that winter has mostly been conquered. Thanks in no small part to those who came before and showed us how it could be done. May your dreams be of gentle snowfalls and cozy hearths, and may you wake to a world where winter is more friend than enemy. As the weak winter sun struggled to break through the lean gray clouds, the people of medieval Europe shivered and drew their thin cloaks tighter around their shoulders. The icy tendrils of winter's grip seemed to crawl into the very marrow of their bones, chilling them to the core. For the poorest peasants, the cruel irony was that their ragged woolen garments, which felt so unbearably hot and sticky during the exhausting labors of summer, now offered scarcely more warmth than a fragile veil against winter's cutting onslaught. They huddled together in their huts, thankful for the little heat thrown by a smoky fire, their breath misting in the cold air. That animals suffered winter's bite as well. The elderly draft horse, ribs pressing beneath its shaggy coat, dreamed longingly of the vanished lush summer grass as it chewed its small portion of hay. The milk cow lowed mournfully, teats cracked and sore in the freezing drafts that slashed through the barn walls. Even the sly barn cats looked somewhat less arrogant, their usual disdain weakened by the emptiness in their bellies and the frost on their whiskers. Yes, winter was an especially harsh season for the lowest ranks of medieval life, But even the nobility, hidden in their grand drafty castles, were far from safe from the deprivations of the season. Many a high-born maiden cried out in frustration as her priceless silk gowns proved useless against the damp chill of stone walls. The castle kitchens strained to create enough steaming hot dishes to warm the noble stomachs. It is said that King Henry II of England, struck by a severe case of the winter chills, once burned an entire chair just to warm his royal backside for a blessed moment or two. His servants despaired, knowing their majesty's temper was ready to ignite even quicker than the furniture if he remained uncomfortably cold for long. But now, as the sun lingered a little longer in the sky each day, glinting off the melting snow, there was cause for celebration. Across the land, people emerged from their winter cocoons, blinking in the bright spring light like bears stumbling out of hibernation. Children burst from their homes, thrilled to feel fresh breezes on their faces instead of the stinging bite of winter wind. With giddy laughter, they ran through the squelching mud, marveling at the first brave crocuses pushing their petals through the thawing ground. In the fields, farmers eagerly awaited Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year. Held on the first Monday after Epiphany, it marked the moment when the soil had softened enough for ploughing to begin. Draft horses and oxen were hitched to ploughs and paraded through the village streets, decked in garlands and ribbons. Church bells rang joyously as the procession passed, a festive start to the growing season. Relief was everywhere, as chimneys puffed with smoke again, no longer choked with ice. The threat of frostbite and illness receded with the snowbanks' faces, worn from the strain of winter survival, now softened into hopeful smiles. Soon, vibrant, spring and summer harvests would replace the bland, preserved grains and hard cheese that had barely sustained them through the long, dark months. From our modern perspective, it may seem difficult to grasp just how momentous this seasonal shift was. Today we grumble about slushy roads or daylight savings time. But for medieval people, the return of spring was life. It meant they had survived another winter of hunger, sickness, and bitter cold. The trees cloaking themselves in green once more reflected the inner renewal people felt as light and warmth returned. Echoes of that joy still remain in medieval songs that celebrated spring's return, such as the English verse, loud sing, cuckoo, the seed is growing, the meadow is blooming, the wood is springing, a new sing cuckoo. Simple but brimming with irrepressible joy. This resilience carried people through the harshest conditions. Neighbors shared what little food they had, hosting communal meals and sending young men to check on the elderly. One such widow, Agnes, frail and alone, nearly gave up hope until a village lad named Tom appeared at her door with firewood, dried peas, and salted pork. For the first time in weeks, warmth and strength returned to her body. Acts of generosity like these were common. Even the nobility, such as Lady Margaret, wife of the local earl, took it upon themselves to feed the poor. She ordered wagons of grain and preserved food sent to starving peasants, and when famine worsened, she quietly sold her jewels to buy more supplies. Her cooks worked tirelessly to turn thin soups into sustenance, and though her peers mocked her compassion, she remained steadfast in her Christian duty. The church also played its part. Monasteries opened their doors to the poor, offering straw, beds, and simple meals. Some even ran primitive hospitals. Young novices like Brother William faced the horrors of disease and frostbite daily, changing filthy bandages and feeding the sick despite their own revulsion. They saw this service as holy work, their way of imitating Christ's compassion. Yet, even the wealthy were not safe. Lady Isabel, pregnant during a vicious cold snap, succumbed to illness brought unknowingly by a coughing servant. She died days after delivering a stillborn child. Even kings were not spared. Henry VI, the gentle and pious ruler, fell into despair during the dreadful winter of 1433, unable to warm himself even beside roaring fires. Seasonal depression, though unnamed, gripped high and low alike. Winter was the great equalizer. Still, as days lengthened and the earth began to thaw, hope returned. On Plough Monday, villagers cut the first furrow in the frost-sparkled ground, a symbolic gesture that marked the rebirth of the farming year. Men blackened their faces with soot for luck, paraded through the lanes, and sang Bodhi songs to wake the soil. The day ended in dancing, ale, and feasting, a covenant that brighter days lay ahead. The same spirit filled noble halls and peasant cottages alike. Kings held lavish feasts with roast swan and sweet marchpane, while peasants like Giles clutched their saved seed with relief, knowing another chance at survival was at hand. Even Agnes, the widow who had nearly perished, now stirred a pot of pottage with a hum on her lips. She had lived to see another spring dawn. Praise be to God. Winter was brutal. Hunger, disease, and bone-chilling cold haunted every soul, rich or poor. Yet in facing it, medieval people revealed extraordinary resilience, generosity, and determination. They understood winter as part of life's eternal cycle, not something to defeat but to endure together. And when spring finally came, they embraced it with unshakable joy. knowing they had triumphed once more over nature's cruelty, and the surest way to survive the cold was to endure it together. So, as you sit under your warm blanket today, complaining about high heating bills or scraping frost from your car, take a moment to think of your medieval ancestors. They endured winter after winter without heaters, hot water bottles, or grocery delivery. Compared to them, our seasonal struggles are minor inconveniences. And perhaps the greatest lesson they left us is that survival requires empathy, generosity, and an unshakable hope for spring. Whether we face a blizzard or a global crisis, embracing hope and gratitude helps us endure until better days arrive. For in truth, the harshness of winter makes the sweetness of spring even more precious. As a medieval king might have declared, let us face winter with courage, so that spring may come in glory. Picture it: frost crunching underfoot, clouds of icy breaths drifting into the air, icicles glittering like glass daggers from thatched roofs. The village lies silent, huddled under winter's suffocating grip. This was the real medieval winter, not the feasts and firesides we imagine from storybooks, but bitter cold, gnawing hunger, and constant struggle for survival. The threat of starvation was relentless. Once crops failed and livestock dwindled, every meal was a desperate fight. Stores of grain ran dangerously low, and many families survived on little more than bitter herbs and shriveled vegetables. In the devastating winter of 1315, storms and freezing weather ruined harvests, reducing them by a third. Desperate peasants tore straw from their own roofs to eat, boiled leather from shoes to fill their stomachs, all while still forced to labor for their lords. Hunger weakened the body, leaving people vulnerable to illness. The common cold could spiral into deadly pneumonia or bronchitis. Influenza swept through villages like wildfire, cutting down the young and old alike. Families huddled together in small houses to share warmth, but overcrowding came at a heavy price. Foul air thick with smoke, sweat, waste, and disease. One account from 14th century Suffolk describes 13 family members' grandparents, children, even chickens and dogs sharing one tiny hut through the winter. It's a miracle any survived until spring. And sickness wasn't the only threat. Fires haunted medieval winters, especially in cramped wooden towns. One misplaced spark could wipe out entire neighborhoods. In 1212, London was consumed by flames on a freezing November night, when water froze inside pipes. Roughly 3,000 people perished, many of them trapped and huddling for warmth. Travel was just as perilous. Roads turned to mud, snow-buried paths, and short daylight made journeys treacherous. Losing your way could mean freezing to death in the dark. Even royalty wasn't spared when Queen Isabella of England traveled from Canterbury to London in 1311. Her party lost the road as night fell. Pregnant and terrified, the Queen reportedly wept as they wandered for hours in the bitter cold. Working animals, too, suffered in silence. Horses and oxen wasted away on scarce feed, their bodies weakening as they dragged carts through deep snow. Frostbite blackened their hooves, ice shattered wooden wheels. Survival was just as much a struggle for beasts as it was for humans. And yet, even amid the misery, people clung to joy. Winter feasts and traditions brought sparks of light into the darkness. The feast of St. Stephen, what we call Boxing Day, was marked by charity. Church alms boxes overflowed with gifts for the poor, while lords shared food with hungry tenants. The Lord of Misrule custom added mischief and laughter. For one day, a lowly peasant or jester was crowned king, presiding over drunken revels and playful role reversals. Still, hope was always fragile. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 showed how quickly winter could turn catastrophic. Weeks of cold rain rotted crops before they sprouted. Food vanished, bread rose to 20 times its normal price. People ate grass, bark, even the flesh of animals usually considered unclean. In some regions, the starving even dug up graves. In England, Belgium, and France, entire communities collapsed. In one heartbreaking case recorded by monks, a starving pregnant woman stole a loaf of bread. She was hanged for the crime. As she died, her child was born on the gallows, falling to the ground alive, but no one dared touch it. The baby soon died beside its mother. Stories like these remind us how merciless winter could be. Even kings and queens weren't safe. Castles may seem grand, but their stone walls trapped, damp and cold. Fires roared day and night, consuming endless wood, but drafts seeped through halls. One Bohemian princess reportedly froze to death in her chamber, despite her wealth. If royalty shivered and perished, imagine the plight of peasants with no furs or servants to tend fires. And yet, humanity endured. Even in famine, disease, and freezing nights, people still laughed, prayed, feasted, and dreamed of spring. Winter was cruel, but it never broke them completely. Their resilience, quiet, humble, often unrecorded, is perhaps their greatest legacy. So the next time you mutter about shoveling snow or paying the gas bill, remember those who came before. They endured far worse. Without the comforts we take for granted, their courage, faith, and persistence are what carried humanity through the darkest winters. And they still inspire us today. The harsh winters of the Middle Ages created the perfect conditions for disease. Outbreaks of influenza, dysentery, and pneumonia were frequent, with respiratory illnesses taking a devastating toll. Crowded around smoky fires and poorly ventilated rooms, people easily spread sickness with a single cough, something as ordinary as a winter cold could quickly become fatal. Doctors, lacking real knowledge, often made matters worse with treatments like bloodletting or purging, believing these would rebalance the body's humors. Charlemagne himself is said to have died in the brutal winter of 814, after his physicians treated him with ineffective poultices and ointments. Malnutrition and overcrowding during cold months also lowered resistance to disease, which may explain why the Black Death tore through Europe with such speed in the mid-14th century. Between 1348 and 1349, it wiped out an unimaginable 30 to 60% of the population. A haunting letter from Sir Luca of Pistoia, Italy, described the tragedy. "I am sick at heart and can barely write. Shops are closed, taverns abandoned, streets are empty, filled only with echoes of grief. Death is everywhere. Families were forced to bury loved ones in mass graves or cast the dying into the snow, too afraid to risk infection themselves." The trauma of those winters left scars that reshaped medieval society forever. For the most vulnerable infants, the elderly, and pregnant women, winter was often fatal. Without medicine or proper nutrition, survival was uncertain. In some communities, up to 1 in 3 infants died within their first year, many during the coldest months. Childbirth was especially dangerous in winter, when weak mothers and newborns had little defense against illness or malnourishment. The tragic fate of Matilda, daughter of King Henry I of England, illustrates this danger. In 1120, while pregnant, she drowned in the freezing waters of the English Channel after the White Ship struck a rock. Her grief-stricken father never recovered from the loss. Even kings weren't spared winter's cruelty. King Arthur himself, in the medieval tale Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, is depicted shivering under his robes in a draughty hall, his teeth rattling from the cold. Winters also brought violent storms and floods. King John of England famously lost his crown jewels in 1216, when his baggage train was swallowed by the rising tides of the Wash. Other disasters were even deadlier. In 1219, a massive North Sea flood killed more than 50,000 in the Netherlands. With no warnings or protections, entire towns were swept away overnight. Ironically, the struggle to stay warm also caused tragedy. Fires, set to fight the cold, often spread uncontrollably in tightly packed timber towns. In 1132, a blaze destroyed large parts of London, including St. Paul's Cathedral. Strong winter winds whipped flames through the city, trapping and killing countless families. Medieval firefighting was little more than bucket brigades, leaving communities helpless against infernos. But sometimes, the greatest enemy was simply the relentless cold itself. Without modern heating, people relied on smoky fires, rough furs, and each other's warmth. Arthritis and frostbite were common, and pneumonia thrived in damp, freezing homes. The 6th century monk Gildas described winter as long and dark, when the icy winds cut to the bone and all the earth lies dead beneath frost. Yet even in the face of such hardship, people endured. Families huddled together, neighbors shared what little food they had, and songs and prayers carried hope through the darkest nights. The 14th century poem Piers Plowman captured their spirit. "Through frost and snow and sleet and hail, all shall pass and peace prevail." For medieval people, survival through winter was not a comfort but a triumph. They measured time in winters endured, each one a battle against hunger, sickness, and cold. And though these winters brought death and destruction, they also forged resilience, compassion, and an unbreakable will to live.